Hello there, and thanks for tuning in to another Home Tracks video. Today we're going to focus on using the Studio 192 PDIF ports, in particular connecting an 11 rack to it, which is a guitar amp emulator modeler. Now you may be asking, what is PDIF? Well, all you really need to know is that PDIF is a digital protocol used to interconnect audio devices. It's widely used and it's well-proven technology, so if you really want to know anything beyond that, probably a good idea just to Google it. Now, when I started looking into using the 11 rack PDIF feature for recording into Studio One via the Studio 192 interface, I read somewhere in some forum, and I can't remember where, that a few people were saying that using PDIF to record the 11 rack into your DAW didn't sound as good as using the analog connections. It seemed a little strange to me, but it kind of stuck in my mind. And I had this open PDIF port on my new Studio 192, and I wanted to use it to connect my 11 rack. So before I committed to this new setup, I figured I'd do some test recordings just to see if there really was a difference in the tone of the digital recording versus the analog. It would also be cool to free up two inputs on the Studio 192 that the 11 rack was using, and to set up reamping from Studio 1 to the 11 rack via PDIF. So I bought a couple of PDIF cables for $10 a piece, connected it all up, and away we go. Here's the setup. The 11 rack PDIF out is going to the Studio 192 PDIF in, and on the digital side, that's all we really need for this test as far as connections go. And in Studio One, we have two tracks, left and right, set up for the PDIF input. And on the analog side, we're connecting the main outs of the 11 rack into channels 7 and 8 on the Studio 192. And again, in Studio One, we have two tracks set up for the analog for left and right. And in Studio One, you see here we're mapping the appropriate channels 7, 8, and PDIF left and right to channels 7, 8, 9, and 10 in Studio One, and we have them labeled accordingly. And you can see here in the UC Surface, which is the Studio 192's virtual mixer, we have channel 7 and 8 linked, which is the analog 11 rack, and we have the two PDIF channels linked, which is the digital 11 rack. It's important to link the channels because otherwise you'll have balance problems on playback. Now for this test, I'll be using 4 different 11 rack rigs to record guitar, and for bass, I'll be using 1 rig. Now configuring the 11 rack is fairly simple. From the 11 rack editor under user options, you need to configure the digital outputs to mirror analog. You also want to make sure that your rig output is set to a proper recording level. You can also adjust rig output on the 11 rack's front panel interface, as well as adjusting digital output to mirroring analog. In Studio One, I have both analog channels and both digital channels going to separate buses, so it's easier to A and B them later. The bluish-green tracks will be the analog signal, and the orange tracks will be the digital signal. Now we'll arm the tracks and record. And now for the bass. Now, from watching the meters, it did seem like the SPDIF input was a few dB higher than the analog. I'm not sure if that's something I could have configured or if the SPDIF output on the 11 rack has a little bit higher gain. Now, when we listen to playback, I'm going to use a feature that Studio One has, which is pretty cool. It allows you to toggle A and B. You hold the Option key down, and then you can, if you hit the solo on 2 tracks, you're able to toggle between them. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm going to be A-Bing the analog and the SPDIF buses on the right. I'll also put up a spectrum meter for those who want to look at the signal as well. Now, let's give this a listen. Well, I've listened to this at least a dozen times while making this video with Biodynamic DT770 headphones. I've also listened to it on KRK Rocket 6 monitors, and I've got to tell you, the only thing I've noticed is the SPDIF recording seems to be a tiny bit louder. Other than that, the tones sound the same to me, but let me know what you think. I think after this test, I'll be freeing up inputs 7 and 8 on my Studio 192 for something else. Thanks for watching, and I hope this information was helpful. Please don't hesitate to post questions in the comments below or email me at the address listed here. If you like what you saw, please take a second to click the like and subscribe buttons. Thanks for watching, and good luck with your home studio.